Welcome to the Manifestation Lab. This is your host, Kelly Howe. From the grounded science to the mystical and unseen, we're investigating this big experiment we call life and finding what really works when it comes to manifesting a life that sets your heart and your soul on fire. Welcome to the lab. So you guys, here's the truth. Every great coach needs an amazing coach. We cannot do this on our own. I mean, I suppose we could, but if you think about it, anybody who wants to be successful in life hires a coach. You would never expect to be a world-class gymnast or a world-class runner. You would never expect to do that without hiring a coach. Yet it's really interesting how after we graduate from maybe high school or college and we get out into quote unquote the real world, and we kind of forget that we need support sometimes. And as a coach, I can tell you that we never outgrow needing another set of eyes. We never outgrow needing a support system. We never outgrow needing someone to give us the hard truth. And we certainly never outgrow the need for transformation and the need for deep inner work and deep emotional release. And we just never outgrow the need for someone to walk with us, alongside us, and to hold our hand. And one of the most interesting things that I've noticed on this journey of calling myself a coach, which by the way, I really call myself a coach for lack of a better word. My traditional training is in nursing. I worked as a nurse for 10 years. I did 8 years in labor and delivery and 2 years in GI. And I got into EFT because I was just completely burned out. And the universe brought tapping to me. And I tried it. I thought it looked ridiculous. I figured, if it was real, then certainly I would have heard of this thing. But I was humble enough to try it and I felt it work right away. I mean, I'm talking like within seconds, I started tapping on my body. I wasn't even really using, the traditional protocol. And I felt my body react to it. I felt myself relax from head to toe. I felt my muscles relax. I felt myself take a deeper breath. I yawned. I think I even sneezed because that's one of the ways that I like to release. It's like a forced energetic release. But I felt a shift right away, right? So I found tapping. I just had to follow this calling. I wanted to learn about it and I wanted to somehow take my nursing skills and help people. I mean, that's why I got into nursing is I wanted to really be there with people and I wanted to help them. I wanted to be part of their, in labor and delivery, you're part of this amazing experience in their life, people bringing a child into the world and their life will never be the same, right? And I knew I wanted to keep doing that, but I started learning EFT and I decided I wanted to help people do that, but I'm not a therapist, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a counselor even. And so when I really started to look at it, I started calling myself an EFT practitioner and I still do sometimes, but I realized that I'm really coaching people, kind of a combination of a healer, a coach, a confidant, an advisor, a consultant, just an open ear to listen sometimes. And the most interesting thing happened when I started calling myself a coach. I had people kind of making comments and, talking about how, oh, coaches, you must be a coach, so you must have it all figured out and things like that, and kind of offhanded jokes. But truly people, I think, were both impressed and also triggered by me calling myself a coach. Kind of this idea that, if you call yourself that, then you better have your shit figured out. You better have everything in life figured out. Everything, under the sun, you've nailed down and got figured out. And the truth is we don't, right? We don't get into coaching because we believe that we have it all figured out. I mean, I don't know anybody that in this profession that does. And the truth is we get into this because we want to help people and because we've experienced some profound transformation and we want to share that with other people. And that's my case. And that is the case of my guest today. Today, I'm talking to Becki Stevens. I wanted to pull the curtain back a little bit on my life, on my experience, and actually have a conversation with my coach. Becki is the one that walks with me. She pushes me. She helps me heal. She sees me from an outside perspective. She can kind of give me, sometimes hard advice and sometimes can see things about me that I can't see about myself. But she's the one that does that with me. So I wanted to talk to her today. She's just a fabulous human. I think her wisdom is always insightful. And I mean, she's truly an old soul. You'll hear it and feel it. But we have such an easy time talking about this stuff. And I wanted to share some of my experience. I'm once again up leveling. I'm getting ready to launch an online community, which hopefully some of you will choose to be a part of. Still putting together the pieces right now and getting all the details worked out, but hoping to launch that late October. So keep an eye out for that. But just like any other time I up level, I go from excitement and feeling super confident and ready to take on the world to kind of feeling like a mess. It's like it draws out every time you decide to up level, it draws out that next level of resistance, that next level of doubt, that next level of inner critic that wants to just be like, you're not cut out for this. You don't want to do this. It's not worth it. It's going to be too much work. All the things, right? To knock you down, to keep you small, to lock you in that box. And I mean, for me, I don't think it's like this for everyone, but for me, it's usually, if I'm pushing myself far enough, I usually have a pretty big dip afterwards. Now, the healing process involved in that is absolutely profound and worth it. And luckily, I know that about myself and I know that about humans now. You should almost expect it, right? I don't want you to have a belief that it has to be like that. I'm not trying to instill that in your mind. But what I'm trying to do is get you to look at yourself and look at your life and go, can I give myself permission to feel a little bit like a mess in order to break the mold of how I operate, how to, do things in a new way? Can I give myself permission to do that? That's what I want to do, right? It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be a process of these ups and downs. No, it doesn't have to be. But realistically, the way that humans work, it stretches us. Things feel wobbly. And it can get kind of messy when we're really looking to do something big and bold. So I wanted to pull the curtain back today, talk to my coach, Becki. As I said before, she is just chock full of wisdom, and we have such a great time. And I can playfully talk about some of the things she's helped me heal from and expand and release. And we just have a great time sitting down and talking. The truth is, the transformation is never done. Whether you call yourself a coach, whether you're a doctor, a teacher, we're all humans. We're all learning. We like to put people up on a pedestal and, as they're out there shining, we want to be like them. And it feels really good to put people on a pedestal sometimes. But the truth is, we all have our shit to deal with, and I am no different. So I want you to enjoy me being very candid and honest and authentic with some of the struggles that I'm going through right now, and really just sit back and enjoy the conversation with Becki. I would love to hear from you guys if you want to drop a comment, or feel free to pop into my DMs at Kelly How Coaching on Instagram. I would love to hear from you if you have topics you want me to cover, if you have guests that you want to recommend, or if you just want to say hi and let me know that you're enjoying the podcast. I would love to hear from you. So sit back and enjoy. I wanted to bring you on as my coach to kind of help shine light on a lot of things and to be really like ultra transparent about my experience and, what it's like, just like moving through life, and that there's like always stuff that comes up and the transformation is never done. But B, specifically, like when we set a big intention and start actually like moving towards a goal that is bigger than maybe what like energetically we've held before, what can happen with that? Because I'm like in the thick of that right now, and I'm in the weeds with it. And and you, as my like savior coach, my guide, I know you always call yourself my, what do you say? Like, I'm your seeing eye dog. Yeah. And I love that. But honestly, you help kind of like you help me with all kinds of things, but you help me like get back grounded and sort of back in the zone to start doing things again when I set these big intentions and I start moving towards it, and then I fall apart.
Yeah.
So I guess,
I think it's great to be super transparent. Like that's what this was all about, is like just really like acknowledging where you're at, and I don't know. I think people see us as like this, like, oh, kind of thing. And
yeah,
like we've all done our own work and we're still doing it. So I think it's so
yeah.
important.
Yeah, it doesn't stop. And I know when I started this podcast and really when I do anything, I try to be as authentic as possible
Hmm.
with like my ups and downs because I have these extremely high highs, but I still have these like really low dips too.
Hmm.
And like you said, people can kind of look at coaches or healers, or really we can put anybody up on a pedestal.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
although I think you and I are exceptional at what we do,
Yep.
we're still a mess sometimes, right?
Absolutely. Because we're human, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what do you see in your practice? I mean, am I unusual, or do other people sort of fall apart when they start setting goals and moving
Shit.
towards
Yeah.
things? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a natural human being thing to do, right?
Yeah.
Because we don't know what the unknown is. And while we think we've got a picture of what we might want to do, there's a lot to get there,
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's not common to find the person who's like, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm off and running. Like, I think it's so common to find that person to be like, yeah, I want to do this, and get all excited, and then all of a sudden, like, certain days just be like, oh my God, I can't even, like, what the fuck am I thinking,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Because I think what we see a lot of times on social media and like on television, and there's this idea of like, oh, if I can just get in alignment, then it's just going to be smooth sailing and it's going to be easy. And I'm not going to say it can't be. Like, I know that we can have limiting beliefs around, things having to be hard and, not really internally letting it be easy or letting it be smooth. However, I think that it's really kind of not talked about enough that when we're like recalibrating the way that we operate and we're like doing things in a bigger, different way, there is like this glitchiness that
Yeah.
can come up. And so I'm glad to hear I'm not alone. I mean, I knew I
No.
wasn't because I work with people all the time
Right.
that are going through the same shit. But
Yep.
um,
But when you're
so
in
have
it, you feel alone.
you do. Yeah, because you like a lot of times people will want to isolate. And then
Hmm.
you're on social media or you're watching these other people that are doing the things that you are visioning.
Hmm.
And nobody's talking about how fucking hard it was for them
Exactly.
or like what was going on behind the scenes. And I mean, I do think that there are certain people that like that putting themselves out there and shining brightly, so to speak, isn't necessarily their um area, their zone of wounding. So maybe it
Mhm.
is a little bit easier and like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Um,
So, as as a coach, as an author, have you gone through any, like, do you have any stories that you could share of kind of a similar
well, I mean, I think
the
as far as like,
resistance?
yeah. So as far as, well, I mean, let's talk about like publishing a book. Like a lot of people are just like, oh my God, I would love to, but that's huge, right?
Mhm.
I did it with someone else, and I feel like sometimes like we were both EFT practitioners, and believe me, we did a lot of tapping, like supporting each other. So when you're
Mhm.
doing it with someone else, like they're having a bad day, chances are you can help them because you're having a little bit of a better day, and then it flip flops, right? So I feel like in that version, like in that sense, like I had support. Like I knew I wasn't alone in it, and
Right.
she was already a published author, so I kind of like just kind of like gave it to her, like.
Yeah.
But as far as like when I first started doing this, like, I didn't have a name for myself or anything like that. And so I needed to, I did, coaching with someone who, business coaching. And I literally could not do a cold call to save my life. I mean, I would sit there and cry and cry and cry
Mm.
and cry. And then I'm supposed to get on a cold call and be like, hey, I can help you with things that are bothering you. And I'm like, like I'm a mess myself. So,
Yeah.
it's definitely something that you have to work through. And quite frankly, it got, for me, I came up with an alternative because the cold call was so outside of my, like completely outside of what I felt was right.
Yeah. I've
So
literally never done a cold call ever
it
to
sucks.
get a
Don't do
client.
it. I mean,
It's
some people it
terrible. That's
works, but like for something like what we do, it's so personal. Like to just call someone and be like, "Hey, I can help you with all your shit." Like it's.
yeah.
I just think it's the wrong way to go about our type of energetic, heartfelt healing, stuff. But it is what it is.
Yeah.
It works for some people.
Right.
And for me, it worked as far as going into offices, like holistic offices in my area that usually had a practitioner that I already knew, right?
Mhm.
And offering some free sessions and saying, hey, I would love to show you what I do and how it feels. And then basically they would do the advertising for me.
Yeah.
Like they would
Then you
be like,
get
oh my
your
gosh,
referral.
I got this lady, you got to go see her.
Yes.
So I really truly don't do any type of advertising whatsoever. So it's
Yeah.
doable for sure. You
Mhm.
you still need to put yourself out there though. And I think if I had thought about it, I would have freaked out. But because
Mhm.
I was working with people I knew already, most of the time friends, it made it a little easier.
Well, I think this is a great point that I really wanted to talk about anyway. And this is the idea that like sometimes like doing that cold call, like you felt all that resistance. I mean,
Mhm.
massive amounts of resistance. Your body, you're crying. You're like, there's literally no part of me that wants to
Like
do this.
like an entire box of tissues resistance.
Yeah, and you're a tapping coach. So I'm sure
Mhm.
you were tapping and I'm
For
sure
sure.
you were having people like, attempt to help you with that
Mhm.
and all that. I do think that there's a difference. I wrote this down before we got on the call because it just like kind of zinged through and I got real clarity on it. But I do think there's a difference between like there's like the inner knowing
Mhm.
that pushes away, right? That says like, no, really, sister, this is not the path for you. And you can't tap that away, right? So
Right.
like it's been the hugest lesson for me. It's like you tried to work on you did work on the resistance,
Mhm.
right? But it's like
Mhm.
once you tap through all the layers of all the emotions and you like keep peeling down the onion, you get to the voice of your soul
Right.
and your higher self. And sometimes, I mean, that's when you get that clarity of like, no, this is really not for me.
Mhm.
And you cannot tap that away.
Right. Right. I mean, I did some quantum EFT, like past life EFT. And in that, it was people would word of mouth, people would come to me. And that was
Yeah.
kind of like my moment where I was like, oh, wait a minute, I don't need to do what all of the mumbo jumbo is right now, or like the cold calls and the posting and the newsletters and all of that. Like that really like was like this aha moment for me as far as like, oh, you know what? Like if I put this out the way I feel, it
Hmm.
it will return,
Yeah.
you
Could you
know?
talk a little bit more about that, like the magnetism? Because I know we both believe in that,
Mhm.
like when we do our inner work, how does that work with the magnetism and drawing that in?
Yeah, I mean, as
I
far
know it's a
as
big question.
yeah, I know, right? Like, let me just
I'm just
tap a
gonna
little right
lay that on you, Becki.
So, as far as like, attracting what you want, if you really get to your true knowing, like if you really listen to that soul knowledge, that soul wisdom that's stretched out over lifetimes, over the universe, over however you want to think about that, when you really tune into that, it's going to happen, right? Like I knew that putting myself out there in a way that I was not comfortable was not the right way. Like I'm a connector, right?
Hmm.
And by connecting, word of mouth is a connection between person to person to person, right? And when I really sank down into that knowing, that trusting, right? And that's a biggie right there.
Hmm.
I really sank down into that and said, you know what? This has happened to me before. I can do it again. And the people who I attract are going to be the perfect people for me.
Yeah.
And I just
Yeah.
put that intention out there and I just said, this is how it's going to be. And I'm
Right.
not saying that people were beating down my door like immediately,
Right.
but it
Same.
pretty easily came to me and on a relatively steady manner, like ramped up to where I'm, booked solid now. So, it
Yeah.
is one of those things where it's kind of like Field of Dreams, put it out there, they will come kind of thing. But
Yeah.
you need to do it from this like true knowing, this true trust of that knowledge.
Yeah.
And when you
Yeah.
can do that, and when you cannot, it's not just for yourself. And I think that
Mhm.
this is actually a really key aspect, especially with manifesting, with attracting, with magnetism. Like, it's not just for us. We want to really like start thinking about all the ways that it can help, like in different layers. So like, if I attract people, the right client, it helps me, it helps my client. Right. So that's your first layer. Second layer is, if I'm attracting client, I'm becoming successful. This shows my children that
Mm.
they could do this kind of thing too, right? And then you just start building it out. And then, if you're helping people and they're helping other people, and it's building out into the community, and you're just kind of like, it's almost like a ripple where you're just seeing this concentric circles and how it goes out into the world. And that's the energy that's like, so powerful.
Yeah, and exciting. And I can feel
Yeah.
that, how different that feels, of like that mindset of like, oh, I'm just helping this one person
Right.
versus that ripple effect going
Hmm.
out. It's so
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah, because
And
I'm showing my kids, and then they're going back to their families, their lives, their relationships, and it's rippling out from there too. So you almost like, when you start to really think about it, it's like a ripple around you, with you the center, but then now you've got your client and a ripple around them, and it's just like this beautiful like rippling
yeah.
effect in all directions.
Yeah. And I find that when people get that really deep connection with their authenticity, and they've like done the shadow work and they've done the work around the wounding, and they're like living in their fullest expression, that's when they start magnetizing these people that just feel so aligned. And then you think about like who they're aligned with and who they're
Hmm.
aligned with and who they're aligned with. And it just, I don't know, it just takes it to a different level. Whereas
Yeah.
like if you do cold calling, and like you said, it's maybe that's right for some people, but for me, I think there was a push away from that because I did want to be energetically aligned with those
Hmm.
people. And if I'm
Yes.
just calling randoms, now I'm sure that you could do that in a way where you're like feeling into it. Like, does this person
Hmm.
feel
Right.
like a good fit for me? Um, but I don't know, there's just something about that like broader vibration that's almost like an extension of who I am that
Hmm.
goes out in such
Yeah.
a massive way that just
Yeah.
feels so exciting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's
Um,
like, if you think about like auras, like everybody's got these different layers in their aura. And when you think, like, if you picture it from looking down above, it's concentric rings that are just coming out.
mhm.
And so we all have these intertwining like auras and magnetic areas. And yeah. I mean, it just
Yeah.
works. So,
Yeah, and I want to back up just a little bit because I had this thought, I want to clarify between, there's the example of the cold call where it's like you're doing your inner work and it's still just a hell no, right?
right.
Whereas there's other times when we are like drawn towards a challenge, like even just doing video, right? I mean, I don't know about for you, but in the beginning, video was like impossible for me. I would like sit there and I'd be like, I'd go frozen and I'd get all awkward. My voice would be weird and
Yeah.
like I didn't know what to say. I'd lose my word. You know what I mean? I mean,
Yeah.
video was like really freaking hard in the
Yeah.
beginning. Um, the difference between the two was that like the more I worked on the resistance and the challenging, emotions and awkwardness and tapped on that, there was always this knowing of like, yes, and I know I need to do more of that. Yes,
Right.
and I'm drawn towards it. Whereas like, tap, 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 get that clarity. Whereas you're like, yep, nope, still a hell no, I'm not going to do it.
Exactly. Exactly. And, I mean, as far as like video and, all of that, like I can't tell you how many recordings I had of me being like, hi, I'm da, 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 and that sucked, like,
Right.
like, so
Click and
exactly.
delete.
And then there would come a time where I'm like, okay, I got this video and I don't love it. But it's good enough. Right. And so then I would kind of like there's a growth in that, right? So
Yes.
there's a different feeling from that, like, hell no, like, no way, I can't do it, like, from the pit of your stomach, the center of your being, to this like, oh god, I just really don't like this because I'm not used to it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where tapping really can help clarify that for you. And I mean, don't get me wrong, on a daily basis, there's stuff that comes up, right? I mean, the first time my daughter's about to start learning to drive. So like, this is what's coming up for me right now. But like, I remember the first time I got in a car and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to throw up. I'm going to hit something. I'm going to like crash the car. My parents are going to kill me. Like all these things, right?
Right. Right.
Now I hop in the car and I'm zipping down and doing my thing and I don't even think about it anymore. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So the more we practice something, yeah, it's going to get easier. We're going to start working out those kinks. But when it is an absolute hell no, like
just listen.
Let it go. Right. Like listen to it and let that go. Like trust that hell no. But you got to do your tapping and just check in with it and see if it's not a bunch of freaking roadblocks that are like stacked on top of each other that you just got to knock over,
Right.
Because sometimes everything feels like a hell no at first.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And so, the work that we do, that's what helps find that clarity and that's when you can, and the more you tune into that true inner knowledge, the more you can feel out when that no comes up, like, okay, is this a true hell no? Or is this I'm really nervous. I got a bunch of roadblocks. I need to do some work on this.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is how I feel it first and then do the tapping. It's always a physical feeling for me first. Mm-hmm. Like that's just how my intuition works. And then I do the tapping and then it's like, oh, I know what I'm supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And then usually, like you said in the beginning, it's like, you get that like excitement of like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do this thing. It's so exciting. And then you get the rush and the smack of the, oh, fuck, what the hell am I thinking?
Right. Right. Yeah. It's the next roadblock. Right. And I mean, but there is a difference that I know that you have noticed in what you're doing, because like, you'll reach out to me and be like, okay, found another roadblock, found some more resistance. And there is an understanding that this isn't a hell no. This is a roadblock. This is a resistance, right? And it's because you've gotten to your hell no's, you recognize that like definitive feeling, and you recognize that this is not a hell no. This is just oh my God, I don't know what to do from here.
Yeah.
Right.
And so how would you suggest somebody taps if they're trying to figure out, like, maybe they're not as attuned to their intuition yet. They haven't been doing this as long. Like, how do you recommend that somebody taps for
Honestly, I
trying
would
to figure out a hell no?
Yeah. So I would keep it super, super simple. And I would just go back and forth like, hell no. Like, oh God, I don't want to do it. Hell no, I don't want to do it. Hell no, at each point. And they're just moving from each point. And then really starting to, like, the more you do that, repeating it over and over and over, you're going to get a feeling as far as like, which one feels like really big. Like chances are the hell no is going to start to feel like, like you're just saying it. Yeah. Right. And that I just don't want to do it is starting to feel like, yeah, that's true. I just really don't want to do it.
Right. I don't want to do it.
Right. And yet I'm doing this work. So there is a part of me that does want to do it.
Like I showed up for my tapping session today.
Exactly.
So clearly there is a part of me that wants to do this. I'm not sure I'm connected to that part of me right now. But.
Right. And then finding that awareness is it's that right there can be a door open right there, right? Into I don't want to do it. Well, I wonder why I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Right. And like finding that curiosity and that compassion for yourself, like, okay, so what's going on here? And then going deeper from that point. But to start out, like, juggle that hell no and that, well, maybe I just don't want to do it feeling, and just really be curious and see what it feels like.
I think that is so powerful. That's usually how I start too. Like, if I'm just tapping on my own or if I'm working with somebody, that's my go-to too. It's just like almost have a little temper tantrum and let yourself be like, hell no, I'm not going to do it. I can't, nobody can make me. Like, I can't even make me. I'm not going to do it. No. Yeah. And like you feel that resistance start to melt. And then that's when that clarity starts to come in, and you either get clear on what direction you want to go and you feel better and you're like, woo, okay, I'm going to go do it. Like, because now the fear has melted away and I'm back in my zone.
Right.
And I'm drawn towards it again. Yeah. Or nah, that was not a great idea. Right. I really don't want to do it.
Exactly.
Or the clarity, of the past memory coming up and going deeper into that. So maybe, would you mind talking about that a little bit? Like what that's like when something from the past pops up?
Yeah. So So when I did the past life work, for my resistance as far as like attracting clients, I was in an actual workshop for quantum EFT. And so it was very much guided, very much, we were bringing that towards, like, we were looking, right?
Yeah.
On other times, I've just had this feeling like, oh, I don't know why, but I don't like this feeling. And then through tapping, like these like thoughts would pop into my head, like where it felt like mine, but like the picture that I'm visualizing doesn't make any sense. Right. And that's
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes my clue in, like, oh, wait a minute. Like, it's my soul's, but in a different lifetime. Right.
Yeah.
And then I do, like some matrix work. I don't know if your listeners are familiar with matrix at all.
No, in fact, I would love for you, to
Yeah.
get into that if
So,
you're open to it.
matrix is where your current self goes into a memory in your imagination, but you're thinking that you're going into this imagination. There's a special way that we do some tapping with that, and we talk to your younger self. Well, guess what? Past lives are other selves, right?
Right.
So it's a very
Mm-hmm.
similar format where we're going into, and there's a couple different ways that you can do it, where you just feel into that person in that past life, or your current self is talking to your past life. There's a couple different ways, and I'll play around with it depending on what I think is right.
Mm-hmm.
More often than not, with past life, like, you are that person, you're feeling into that person, that being, right?
Mm-hmm.
Still the same soul. So you've got information.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
you're basically, you're tuning in, assessing the situation, sometimes doing regular straight up tapping, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then really starting to, like, be aware, like, what's happening here, what needs to happen, what realizations, like, now that all the emotion isn't right there front and center, like taking a step back and looking at it through different eyes, like through your
Mm-hmm.
current self eyes, and being like, okay, it's almost like watching a movie where you're like, oh my God, why are they not seeing that the person is right there in the darkness?
Uh-huh.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Right. Like turn the light on or run the other way, kind of thing. You
Mm-hmm.
get a different clarity. Right. So you're in this past life, you've tapped down any of the intensity around what's happening in that lifetime. And now you're starting to become aware. And through that awareness, you can then tap down any vows or any rules that you decided in that moment,
Oh man, that is so powerful. So
right?
could you give some examples of some like really common vows that come up and
Well, I mean, I so as a I actually, I don't know if you want me to or not, but I'm pretty sure this was one of yours, where
oh,
you
sure, yeah.
you were a leader and
Mm-hmm.
you led people up into the mountains. Was
Oh
this one
yeah.
yours?
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And everyone
And
died. It was
and
great.
everyone died. And
Yeah.
you got this belief that you couldn't be a leader because you were leading people to their death.
Right. And then it
Right.
wasn't safe.
And
And
that it wasn't safe. And there was so much, so many, I mean, how many emotions had to have been piled into that, right?
oh my gosh, yeah.
But then as we did the tapping, there was this realization, this clarity, that there was another group of these people that left and that they actually got to safety, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And the people that did die would rather have died there than in the atrocious situation that you had led them from,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I have
right?
goosebumps. I do remember that. Mm-hmm.
And so that's a huge moment right there, where, like, we all, not everybody, but like so many people think like, oh, death is the worst possible thing, right? How you die is a whole different situation,
Right.
right? And all of those people in that lifetime that you led away from these horrible atrocities of war would have died these horrific, horrific deaths. You
Mm-hmm.
allowed them to die in freedom,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Oh, that was so
And
powerful.
yeah, yeah. So, there's and that belief now has clarity, like, oh, okay, I didn't lead them to their deaths necessarily. I actually led them to freedom.
Right. Right.
right?
Yeah.
And there was a group of them that actually truly got to be free and live, right?
Yeah. I think that was a past life we had to come back to a couple times too, because there was
Absolutely.
so much in
So
it
many
that
layers.
so many
Yeah.
layers.
Yeah.
So the way that I see that, and I don't claim to like fully understand what's happening, but the way that I understand it is that our soul is kind of experiencing all these lives at once. Like
Hmm.
there's no beginning and end to a
Right.
soul. It
Right.
sort of drops in and out of these
Hmm.
bodies and has these different experiences. And the way that it makes sense to me, and like I said, I don't know that this is exactly how it works, but it's almost like the soul memory is still, because it's there in the field, is activating the physical resistance and the mental
Hmm.
resistance. Does
Yeah.
that make sense
Absolutely.
to
Because,
you?
well, there's different, each lifetime has its own, uh, for lack of a better term, lessons that we need to like acknowledge. Oh, wow, here is this thing that I'm running up against, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
what, like finding that stepping through. And sometimes that stepping through of a lesson is to be like, oh, that's my hell now,
Yeah.
right? But other times it's oh, that's just a roadblock. That's just resistance. And then stepping through that in this lifetime sets up the next lifetime for a different lesson,
Right.
right? And,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in all the times that I've been doing this work, like there are a lot of people who, oftentimes it's clients who are concerned about another family member or something like that. And they're just not ready to step through that specific lesson in that lifetime, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
we might even do work in this lifetime and not step through fully through the lesson. And that's why we have all these different aspects, all these different layers that we need to work through.
Mm-hmm.
And you might, I can't tell you how many times I've had clients been like, well, we've already worked on that. Yeah. Well, we worked on
Right. I
one.
know I do that sometimes. I'm like, mother effer, I know
Yeah.
we've worked on this and
Yep.
here we are again.
And here we are again. And that's when you get curious, like, okay, what else is in this? Because it keeps coming up, right? I
Yeah.
keep running into a roadblock. Like, for me, it was the advertising part over and over. I mean, I was practically running into walls over it because
Mm-hmm.
it was just this horrible feeling of advertising myself, right?
Right.
And it literally, at first it was the cold calls, and then it was, like putting myself out there. And I, through the tapping, I would oftentimes get these amazing downloads of ways that I could put myself out there that felt organic, that felt true to me. The final, like the real major final part for me, and maybe it's not the final part, but the biggie, at least for now, is that I needed to really truly love and trust and know myself.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And when
Yeah.
I got to that part, everything else just kind of was like, well, you know what? Like, I'm just going to do what feels like real to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a huge thing. Like, that was a massive lesson that I stepped through in this lifetime.
Oh my gosh, it's so huge. It's so powerful. I'm
Yeah.
having so many thoughts about like, those feelings of what you're describing. And I'm going through it again. And I'm like kind of conscious of it and looking at it. And I'm like, damn, there I go again. But it's again, like when you start doing that new thing, there's a tendency to start listening to outside advice, the
Hmm.
experts, right?
Hmm.
Experts can have great ideas and
Hmm.
can have so much insight and so much wisdom, but they are also are not your soul. They're not your
Exactly.
experience. And I think as an old soul, like we've done this a lot of times
Hmm.
and our soul has like kind of specific things that it want, like, yep, I'm doing that. Nope, I'm not doing that, and things that don't feel in integrity will feel like shit. And
Yeah.
again, not in a way of like just resistance that's like, ooh, I still want to do this, but this is really hard. And
Mhm.
like there's some past life stuff that I need to work through.
Right.
But coming back to your true essence and
Hmm.
your soul's voice and saying, this is how I'm going to do it.
Hmm. Yeah.
I mean, gosh, like that message, I think everybody on the planet needs to hear. Like, it's
Absolutely.
not going to look like someone else. Even the
Right.
experts that seemingly know
Hmm.
what the right thing to do,
Right.
it's probably likely
Yeah.
not going to work for you
Yeah.
in some areas.
Yeah. I mean, I joke around all the time. I mean, I have a couple of colleagues and friends that are trainers of EFT and matrix and, like that kind of stuff. And I'm always like, so, I know this isn't exactly the way that we were trained to do it, but I take my stuff and I tweak it to fit
Mm-hmm.
me and my clients. Right. So like,
Yep.
I love to like take like, EFT and matrix and imagineering and heart speak and just like smush it all together and make a new flavor, you
Yeah.
know?
Oh, you're amazing. Your sessions are
I
the
was like,
bomb.
I just chuck it all in a bowl and stir it up kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And it works. And that's the thing. I think, I mean, at least for myself, I mean, growing up, like I was like, by the book, this is how it is. Follow a
Mm-hmm.
recipe. You don't alter that recipe, like that kind of thing. And I think when we look at the experts, quote unquote, right? Like that's your basic recipe. That's the recipe that they figured out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Take it as your basic recipe and start adding stuff to it,
Mm-hmm.
right? See what works for
And
you.
they
And
will
sometimes,
tell you,
right,
not to.
exactly, because that's theirs. That's what they're marketing right now,
That's theirs. Yeah.
right?
Like this is the formula that works. And my God, I'm so grateful that they have that formula and that it works for some people. But if you're
Mhm.
trying the formula and it's not working for you and they're telling you it should,
Right. Add a new ingredient, take an
add a new
ingredient out,
ingredient.
like do something, like make it yours. And that's when the magic's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. So I want to back up just a little bit. Um, we were talking about matrix reimprinting
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
vows
Sorry.
and no, it's okay. I just, there was something I wanted to say about, I was talking about, how there's the energy, the memory is
Mhm.
like in the field and then that is felt through the body. But I wanted to like really zoom in on that for a second, because a lot of times I find that you're like our mind will be like, sure, I'm going to go do that thing. Not a big deal. But then boom, we get hit with all these like very visceral physical things, which
Mhm.
is what happened to me with the podcast, with, what happened to me with, now I'm putting together this online community and my mind is like, hell yes. Like this is so aligned. I mean, I know I can like hear my guides. They're like, yay, yes, that's what,
Right.
that's great. But getting hit with that physical,
Mhm.
that physical resistance.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know. Can you speak to that at all? Like,
Yeah,
do you
sure.
experience
So
that?
I'm gonna totally botch up this saying, but like basically, like when we ignore our emotions and the feelings that we feel, which is an easy thing to do because we've kind of been taught to do that
We've been
societally. Like,
conditioned to do
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah, like like you don't want to go to work today, suck it up and deal. Like it's that kind
Right.
of thing. I
You're
mean,
fine.
yeah,
I'm
like
fine.
exactly. Like don't cry, don't feel this, don't. And so, we are very good at putting our emotions, our feelings on the back burner, right? Our triggers, our like roadblock feelings, right? Just muster through and just put your head down and keep going, fake it till you make it, which I hate that saying,
I
right?
know. I know there's value in it, but it really bugs me too, because I'm
Yeah,
like just building a foundation on
exactly.
holes,
Exactly. Exactly.
on
And
a
so
empty hole.
right, right. So when we're constantly shoving our emotions to the back burner, it finally, like, it reaches a breaking point where it's like, well, you know what, if you're not going to pay attention, I'm going to make you pay attention. And when it comes to physical things, like there's a certain amount that we can put off, right? Like not address and just ignore and just fake it till we make it kind of thing.
Right.
But then it gets to a point where you physically, like, it knocks you out, right?
Yeah.
It will give you the cold of all colds. It will give you the flu. It will give you a pulled muscle. It will give you, and the list just
Back
keeps getting worse and
spasm.
worse and
Yeah.
worse, right? Where you
Mhm.
physically have to do nothing.
Mhm.
And our bodies and brains aren't necessarily aware of the fact that like there are tons of distractions that we can give, but it wants you to just basically like tune in, like, okay, I'm knocking you down for right now so you can do nothing but pay attention to me, kind of thing.
Mhm.
We are also very good at watching TV and like distracting ourselves, so that
Distraction.
just
Mhm.
adds to the level of physicality that our bodies have to give us in order to get us to
Mhm.
say, oh, what's going on here, right?
Mhm.
And I love, like, hearing what people are suffering from and then tying it back into the emotionality of it. And they're like, oh yeah, I totally feel that. And I'm like, okay,
Oh
so
man.
that's
Yeah.
what we address. So if you look at your, when you physically are feeling something, like use that as a signal, right? And be like, oh my gosh, body, I'm so sorry I waited this long, like that you had to get this loud, right?
Yeah.
Like what's going on? And just really like shutting everything off, really tuning in
Mm-hmm.
and exploring. And it doesn't always show up as like what you think it's going to be, right? It,
Right.
who knows what it is? Like it might be this like resistance to cold calling, and you keep stubbing your toe on something and it eventually breaks and you got to have a boot on, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't always have a rhyme or reason, but there's a lot of connection oftentimes. Like I had one client who, she came to me because she had constant pain in her like upper shoulder, like, and so she described it as her traps, right? Like she had this issue with her traps. And while we're talking about stuff, we're digging in, I'm getting a little bit of background, especially it was over a couple of sessions. And she was like, I wanted to run and run and run as a kid, but we had this fenced in backyard and I would just run the fence, run the fence, run the fence, run the fence. Like I was trapped. And I'm like, and there it is.
Your traps. Your
Yep.
traps.
You are
Yeah.
trapped. It's in your traps. And as soon as we started like tapping on that, I feel trapped feeling, it just like went away. Like it was like, oh, finally you figured it out.
Yeah. Oh man, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I was just thinking too, it is amazing how that's a really great example of how that physical experience of having the impulse to want to like go and run, but being kind of,
Mm-hmm.
forced to stay in that little enclosure
Mm-hmm.
can create these mental blocks that make us feel trapped and keep us
Mm-hmm.
from doing something that would actually be decently
Right.
simple because
Right.
because
And
our mind is like, no, we're in this little fence. You want to
exactly.
go there, but we're in this fence.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. She
you know,
actually, it was interesting because we released that and within the year she had expanded her business.
I
And
totally
I'm
believe
like,
that.
there is a connection here.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
she had started out super, super small and she stayed super, super small for years. And then within a year, I don't even think it was a year to tell you the truth, like she had expanded out
Totally.
and
I
was
totally
doing
believe
all
that.
different types of things. So,
Yeah.
tuning into where you feel stuff in your body and then really getting curious about it
Mm-hmm.
all the time. You have to be compassionate
Yeah.
because a lot of the stuff that we deal with now as adults happened when we were little, like
Mm-hmm.
the foundation of it. Like
Yeah. And
she
it
was
doesn't
little and she was
feel
just running in that fenced in yard. And
right. And our
something
adult
about
mind will
that.
be like, that's not important. That no, I'm over that. That's not a big
Exactly.
deal.
Right.
I don't feel trapped like I'm in
Yeah.
a fence.
Yeah.
But the mind, it's imprinted in there.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I oftentimes will suggest, and I think we might have actually done this too, like when we kind of like dig into something, we get like kind of like this vow that was created, right? I often say like, all right, imagine that you're going into your 4-year-old self closet and I want you to pick out an outfit, right? And I want you to see your 4-year-old wearing it. Fits great, right? Works. And then I want you to have her take that off and hand it to you, your current self, and I want you to put it on. Well, it doesn't
Yeah.
fit. It doesn't
Doesn't
fit.
fit.
So why are
Mm-hmm.
you still hanging on to this dress? Why are you still hanging
Like
on to this?
smashing ourselves into the tiny
Right,
little jacket. It's
right.
not meant to be worn
So
anymore.
what worked for us once isn't working for us now. I
Mm-hmm.
think something that's super important to remember with that is that just because it no longer fits perfectly, there might be some part of it
Mm-hmm.
that's still useful. Not always, but sometimes. And that's why we've held on to it for so long, because there's some part of it that's been working. And that's when
Mm-hmm.
you want to take that little dress and you want to repurpose it.
And keep the wisdom
Yeah, keep
that
that
came with
wisdom
it.
that's
Yeah.
usable now.
We all run around with these outdated beliefs and imprints and programs, and we have no idea that they're there. And I
Right.
know, the people that are listening, a lot of them probably are already like kind of digging and looking to mine out this stuff.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I know that I can really speak to the frustration of like knowing that there's something, I can feel something physical and, happening, like
Mhm.
feel a contraction happening in my body, something's going on, and looking for it and not being able to find it.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so maybe you could talk about, because you do the art tapping stuff.
Mhm.
And,
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Tapping.
know that there's ways like to work with color and stuff so that it gets into the
Mhm.
subconscious. Do you have a few minutes to talk
Yeah.
about that before we wrap
Absolutely.
up?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, um, especially it's so good when you can't put your finger on what's going on. Like it's there, it's starting to bubble up, but you're like, oh, I don't know what this is. I don't know what to do with it. Like take a piece of blank paper, take a couple pieces of blank paper, grab a bunch of markers, right, in all different colors. Just tune into that feeling and just draw a picture of it. And it doesn't have to make sense. It could be scribble. It could be, like a blob. It could be like some stars and a triangle and zigzags, right? And then to give yourself a little bit of distance from that feeling, you're not necessarily naming that feeling. You're not talking about it at all. We're not talking about an event because we don't know
It's
what,
a mystery.
right? Right. You're going to basically tap about the lines, the shapes, the positions, the colors on the paper. And you're just tapping through the points, moving along as you describe what you're noticing on the paper. And it gives you that distance to kind of like look back, almost like you're looking at somebody else's problem and you're like, oh yeah, I can figure that out. I see what the
Mm-hmm.
connection is, right? You just do a couple of rounds of tapping on that. Then you flip it over, take a breath, maybe give a little wiggle, draw how it feels now, and then tap about that, and then flip that over and draw how it feels now. And you're just going to like move yourself through that feeling, but it's all lines and picture, like lines and colors and shapes.
Yeah.
And sometimes it might make sense, and other times you're like, I don't know what this is about, right? And you're just moving through that aspect.
I love
And
that.
just
You've done that with me, and it is really powerful. And I've done it on my own as well. In fact, I
mhm.
pull out my iPad sometimes. There's that,
Yeah,
what is that app? Oh gosh, I haven't done it in a while. But it's like you can just doodle in it and you can change the colors
right.
and,
Yeah,
the width
yeah.
of, whether you're using a pencil or a paintbrush or
Mhm.
whatever. Um, and you can just like make these really cool pictures, just sort of trying to
Yeah.
put color and texture and shape to what you're
Mhm.
feeling and sensing.
Yeah,
And I think that is just
yeah,
such a cool way to get to some of those really deep subconscious blocks that I think have
yeah.
either been there for so long that they are like inaccessible, or
Mhm.
there's some sort of ancestral pattern that like our mind can't understand because
Right.
it didn't start with us. Or
Exactly.
sometimes,
Exactly.
like a past life thing that's getting triggered viscerally
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
energetically or all of the above
Yeah.
that,
And
maybe.
sometimes, right, like sometimes you get that clarity at the end, like, or sometimes it's just that you've worked through it and it's gone,
Mhm.
right? And what the like it, the about the story isn't the important part. It's releasing that feeling,
I do love that about the
right?
art tapping that you've done with me, because
Yeah. Of
my mind loves to figure this shit out. Like I love to see the
course.
patterns. It's part of who I am. Like
Yeah.
I love to be like, oh, this specific moment in
Hmm.
time is what caused this
Right.
huge issue in my life. I love that. I love it,
Exactly.
love it, love it.
Yeah.
However, I have learned through the years, and you've helped me do this, to recognize that we don't always need to know. In fact, if we can give ourselves
Right.
permission to not understand, we can let go
Mhm.
of things and never even know where it came from. I mean, we're not going to
Right.
understand if we've had all these, however many lifetimes. And even if it's not our life, like maybe we're picking up on the energies of like the collective, because there's been so much of
Mhm.
that lately with,
So
the
much.
highly
Yeah.
sensitive people and
Yeah.
all the big energies that have been
Yeah.
flying around.
Yeah.
Maybe we're just not meant to understand, but just to honor the experience and do what we can to work through
Exactly.
it.
It's an acknowledge, like, yes, I feel this. And that's sometimes like that might be a great way to wrap up your tapping when you're just lessening the intensity. It might just be like, even though I'm releasing this feeling, I don't need to understand it
Right.
necessarily. Maybe all I needed to do was just maybe the stepping through was just allowing the release,
Mm-hmm. This is making me think I need
and
to go do a little bit of this.
giving yourself permission and allowing yourself, while they often like I think when I first started hearing it, I was like, well, it's the same thing, like giving yourself permission and allowing something. But for whatever reason, there is a little tweak every once in a while. I kind of play around with those when I'm tapping with folks. But those two things, that's so powerful, to allow yourself to feel the feeling and release it.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we're so busy shoving the emotions away all the time, we're not allowing
Right.
ourselves to feel.
Right.
We're not giving ourselves permission to explore it.
Excuse me. Ooh, that was a good one.
Release, baby,
My
release.
allergies are crazy right now. Ugh, I was just
Uh,
thinking I need to do
yeah,
some of that picture tapping for my allergy stuff,
yeah,
because that's an area where I've
absolutely.
like dug and dug and dug and,
Mhm.
looked and
Yeah,
looked and
yeah,
examined and
yeah,
investigated. And
yeah,
I did not
yeah.
have allergies. I only have them this time of year. Like, I think it's ragweed or something. Um,
Mhm.
so like it just started less than a week ago. They kicked in, and until that first
Right.
frost, they will drive me crazy. And
Mhm.
I didn't have them until I was in my mid-20s. And then one
Right.
fall, it was like boom. And
Boom. Yeah,
I've done so much trying to figure it out, and I haven't had any luck.
yeah.
Did you write that down
So
for us
it'd
to
be
tap on that later?
interesting. Yeah,
Good.
yeah, I'm actually taking some
Good.
notes.
Good.
So it's interesting to explore, and you may have already done this, like you explore what happened around the time that it started, and then explore what happened at that time of year in other times of your life,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? So because that little nugget of information, like this is bad, whatever it was, like this isn't a good thing, gets stored, and then there's something that happens that triggers, and now here it is. So I had a client who came to me for shoulder issues. He was he built houses, so he's like, I need my
Mm-hmm.
shoulder, like this is my livelihood, like I need to be able to swing a hammer. And he's like, it just kind of came on a couple of years ago. And so we started digging back, and I said, have you ever had a shoulder injury? And he said, yeah, well, back in high school, I did. Football injury. It healed though. And I'm like, all right, well, what was going on in your life around then? And he's like, well, I don't know. I was in high school, and it took a little digging, but eventually he's like, well, my parents were going through a divorce. I'm like, okay,
Big.
that's a big
It's
deal,
big. Yeah.
right? So put that down. We did some tapping around whatever was emotion there, put it in my notes. And then I'm like, okay, so let's talk about when it started recently. Cause he's like, I didn't injure myself. It just started happening. I'm like, all right, what was going on around that time? And he's like, well, about 6 months previous to that, my wife and I started divorce process.
Oh my goodness.
And I'm like, well, there's your trigger right there.
Right.
And he said, one thing that clued me into that, like I kind of suspected that we were going to come back because I knew that he was going through the divorce.
Mm-hmm.
He said it only bothered him at home, but never when he was at work.
Oh my gosh. Oh, wow.
Right.
Wow.
So and I've heard similar stories where a woman suddenly became allergic to strawberries
Mm,
when she was an adult.
mm, mm.
Right. And divorce happened to be the same thing, where she started having this issue. And she used to love strawberries. And we did, it was a demonstration, and they did a matrix reimprinting. Like, when was another time you felt whatever this feeling was? Like, she's like, it's an allergy. But when they really like tuned into that feeling, and she couldn't name what the feeling was, but they tuned into that feeling because she could feel it, right? Went back to a time when she was like 3, sitting at the kitchen table eating strawberries, and her parents were in another room arguing, and one of the parents said, that's it, I just want a divorce.
Oh, wow.
And then 40 years later, she's going through a divorce herself and suddenly becomes allergic to strawberries
Oh, wow.
because her little brain said it's the strawberry, something about strawberries.
Yes. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Isn't it fun to do what we do
Mhm.
and
I love it.
find
I
these
love it, like,
things?
connecting the
Oh
dots.
my
Yeah.
gosh, I do too. And I have done that kind of investigating, but one of the things that I did realize, now my allergies started, like I said, my mid 20s or early 20s. I think I had a couple of years where I had like bad colds in the fall before I
Mhm.
realized that it was
Mhm.
allergies. You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
but interestingly, my dad passed away 7 years ago on August 28th.
Mm.
And that was one of the things when he died, I was like, okay, now that's weird. But I mean, I do believe that we have some sort of connection to our future
Mhm.
energies. And so I had
Mhm.
wondered if like somehow I was already sensing it in some way. I don't know, but that was definitely a big
Well,
significant event.
another thing that just popped in my head for you being an empath,
Mm-hmm.
like, we subconsciously are aware of the lessons that other people need to work through.
Mm-hmm.
And when he passed, you may have said, you know what, I need to take some of his stuff to help him in his next lifetime. I mean,
Oh,
totally
wow.
subconscious,
Yeah.
not anything like that you are like, oh, because
Right.
chances are logically you would have been like, I got enough of my own shit. I don't need any of
Yeah.
yours, right?
Yeah.
But the empath in us is like, oh, please I will help you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And this is even for people that you can't stand.
Mm-hmm.
The empath is just like, let me help, let me
Yep.
help, let me
Yep.
help,
Energetically, that
right?
we're just like
Yeah,
trying to let me take that energy from you so you can feel better and maybe you'll be a better
yeah,
person. Terrible.
exactly.
It's very
The
selfish
problem
of us,
with that is
actually.
that right, the problem with that is it
Yeah.
backfires on all
Yeah.
parties because they are like, oh sweet, I don't have to, I feel great,
Yeah.
right? So they're not going to like work through the lesson that
Right.
they need to
And
work
there's like a
through.
weird,
And now we're
yeah, like a weird element of
yeah,
like selfishness on our part. Like, oh, if I take
mhm,
that energy from you, you're going to be in a better mood. And then that serves me. You know what I mean? I
right.
mean,
So
obviously we
there's
care about
always
other
a purpose.
people, but
Mhm, right. Right. But the thing is it ends up making us feel worse. And it's
terrible.
super hard to figure out
Mhm.
how to step through the lesson because it's not
It's not
ours.
ours. It's not ours to walk through.
Right.
Yeah.
And circling back to what the original part of our conversation was about is a lot of times those roadblocks that we're running up against are oftentimes our parents,
Yes. Yep.
right? That we witnessed over and over and over. And our child brain stuck it in a slot, like put a label on it that said, this is not possible.
Mhm.
Because if mom and dad can't do it, how
How
could
could I
I?
do it? Right. I call it the
Yeah.
like the energetic stamp of childhood where it's like we didn't
Mhm.
ask for it, but
Yep.
it's like just it's just imprinted on there,
Boom. There it
There it
is.
is
Yeah.
and it's in
Yeah.
there. We think we've
Yeah.
left the stamp
Yeah. And
behind, but it's still there.
right. Exactly. And, I mean, that plays into factors. So, like, not just with business, but with weight. Like, our family is fat. Like, we're just big people,
Right.
kind of thing. Like, all kinds of. It plays in so many aspects.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
and so it is often a very good thing to kind of be curious. Is this mine?
Mhm.
Right? And that's something that, like, if you're coming up with, like, is this a hell no or is this a resistance? Another question you can ask is it even
Is
mine?
it mine? Yeah. And you mentioned earlier the vows and the rules, so it's like there's so many subconscious rules like if I do that, I'm a bad person. Or, the people in my
Mhm,
family, like you mentioned, like people in my family are fat.
mhm.
And there's rules behind,
Right,
subconscious
right,
rules behind suddenly being the one person
mhm,
outside of, the tribe.
right,
Um,
exactly. And remember, when you're not in your tribe, when you are outside of that tribe, that's a life or death moment.
mhm,
Even though in reality you're not.
right.
Amygdala in our brain,
Mhm.
very, very old, 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 is like, you must be part of the tribe in order to survive.
Yes. Very primal
If you are,
wiring.
yes, so
And we
primal.
all have
If
it.
you are not, absolutely. And look, it has served its purpose because we are here, right?
Mhm.
But as soon as you start to do something a little bit different than your tribe, even if you're like, I hate what my tribe does, I wish I could do something
Yes.
different, that subconscious kicks in,
Mhm.
right? And starts to throw up those resistance because it is saying, if you are not part of this tribe, you are going to die.
Yes.
So that's a lot of times what it boils down to is what happens if you do this.
Yes. I think that there was a lot of my own not imploded. What word am I looking for here? Self-imposed. There it is.
Mm-hmm.
I had my own self-imposed rules around entrepreneurship and what that means and what kind of person does that. And,
Yeah.
but I also know that I have had a lot of family rule breaking that I've had to go through because in our family, it's like you get the job with the insurance, with, the 401k and with the blah, 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 blah. And that's what's safe.
Right.
And that was me stepping outside of the tribe and saying,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to do that way.
Right.
And it was scary.
Yeah.
I mean, I worked through it, obviously.
Yeah,
but,
for sure. Sure.
But yeah, I think the takeaway for today is, I mean, there's like probably two really big takeaways that I wanted to talk to you about. And number one is like, the work is never done, ever,
nope.
ever.
And that's okay.
And that's okay. And that's the way it's supposed to be, because our soul comes here to learn and grow. And I think old souls have even more of that, like desire to kind of master the earth experience. And part of that mastery is recognizing that sometimes I'm a shit show, and, letting go of the perfectionism. And the second, I think, really big point is going after the thing and meeting resistance and meeting glitchiness doesn't necessarily mean that it's the wrong path. It can, but helping, drilling down to that soul voice will help get the clarity on, is this a hell no? Or is this, my soul really wants to expand in this way? And that is truly in alignment. And I'm just going to know I'm going to dip into a little bit of struggle on the path.
Right.
And that's okay.
And I think a lot of people end up feeling that hell no and being like, all right, well, this isn't the thing for me. When in reality, it's a hell no to the vanilla recipe and it wants you to add stuff.
Amen. I love that. It's perfect. So
right.
True.
Like somebody else's way of doing it is the hell no.
Yes.
You need to just look at that and be like, oh, this is how I want it to be done.
Yes. I have. I mean, I could not have said that any better. That is perfect. I'm so grateful to have you to help me work through this stuff. And as you mentioned, like I know myself really well now. So I know that when I'm going to do something big and I'm stretching myself and I'm kind of breaking my own mold, that I have this sort of shutdown period that I go into where I get really tired and kind of confused and dissociated. And it is not fun. I'm not going to lie. It's not fun. Yeah. It feels a little bit like self-inflicted torture. And there's a part of me always that's like, what am I doing? But if we can work through it, then you get to experience that broader expansion. And it's so juicy and wonderful and sweet and totally worth it. Did I tell you I named that resistance? Like, I don't know if I told you this. I named it.
No, I don't.
Because I had to have a mental reframe so that it didn't feel like it was wrong, because I love Esther Hicks. I love Abraham. I love their work. And I have been obsessed with it for years around abundance and manifestation. But there is this constant message of like, it doesn't have to be hard. It needs to be easy. And so I think I would sort of like, if things got glitchy, I would sort of like back away from it. Like, oh, that must not be the right path. I think I got the wrong message. I don't think that's their fault. I think I got the wrong message from that.
Well, it was your interpretation of it.
It was my Yeah, it was like, if it gets a little too crunchy or hard, then maybe I'm on the wrong path, sort of thing.
Right.
That can be true. I want to be clear. That can be true. But again, we got to find the clarity. But I named it because I needed the mental reframe. So I named it Bert. And he's like my emotional personal trainer. So it's BERT. So it's behavioral emotional resistance training.
Love it.
So now when I'm like pushing myself and I'm feeling myself get all like wonky and out of sorts, and I'm like, hey, Bert, let's do this, So it feels to me like I'm going to a trainer and I'm pushing through and I'm getting stronger.
Love it.
Rather than
love it.
Like I'm melting. This is the wrong path. I shouldn't be doing this.
Right. And by doing that, it gives you that distance. Right. And it gives you something like, I've worked with trainers before where I'm like, are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah.
Like, you want me to do how many of these?
Totally.
Right. Like I can't. Mm-hmm. And yet eventually I do. And then that feels so good.
Feels amazing.
Right? Amazing. And so by naming your resistance, I love this idea. By naming your resistance, you can curse it out, right? Totally. You can do some big old fuck you tapping on Bert to Bert, right? You can be like, oh my God, Bert, I'm dragging today. And you just have a vent, right? Yeah. You can really start to get like it gives you that distance, right? I oftentimes will suggest to people, especially people that have like that running loop in their head of like, oh my God, I have to do this. And what if? And I'm like, all right, imagine that it's a hamster on a wheel, right? And then name your hamster, describe your hamster. Nice. Like for you, I would say, draw a picture of Bert, right?
It's definitely a dude.
And then
I was like, of course I had to make it a man. Like, Bert.
It fit. Like maybe it's Berta, and you got to come up with some A, you know? Right. So who knows, but it's okay. I mean, I think it's brilliant. I love that idea of like naming your resistance.
I felt, how that feels like when you suddenly have a cognitive shift around it. I felt like I was hitting a brick wall, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh, I see what's happening here. I'm just training. And it's like this dip that I go through, this kind of shutdown period almost feels like when you do a hard workout and your muscle, like you can't work out for a little bit because you're so sore. Right. It feels like some sort of recalibration like that, where, you start and you don't realize you're going to be sore because it feels so good. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, this does not feel good.
And, to take it one step further, like when you are actively working out, you are actually breaking muscle fibers.
True.
And when they repair themselves, they're stronger.
True.
And so a lot of times you have to feel like you're breaking a little bit.
Yes.
In order to come back stronger.
It's true.
So
it's true. That has been my experience.
I mean, there is a big line there. Like you don't want to break all your muscle fibers.
Right. Fine line, people. Fine line.
Right. Very fine line. But you want to push some to their limit, right? In a very gentle way. And that's where having a trainer to help you can be beneficial.
Totally. And when you're doing it with your soul guidance, you'll know it feels like a yes. And and the challenge is worth it. And the rewards on the other side of it. And the expansion is totally worth it. Totally worth it.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely feel a little bit like a shit show right now. And like I said, I'm so grateful for my seeing eye dog that is helping me offload all my past life junk and my this life junk and the junk that we don't know what it is.
Right. Yeah. And the beauty is that tapping really lends itself to all of that. All of it. Like whether you've got clarity or whether you're like, I don't know what I'm feeling right now.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
Definitely. Where can people find you? Are you taking on clients right now? Are you waitlisting?
I'm waitlisting. They're certainly welcome to reach out. I'm at BeckiStevensCoaching.com.
Okay, perfect.
And So,
well, I adore you and I'm so grateful for your time.
Likewise.
And this is fun. Likewise. We'll have to do this again.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you.
For sure. You are welcome.